So if you are an 80s baby like me, or just somebody who likes to read a lot, you're probably familiar with Flowers in the Attic. This was a book written by V.C. Andrews in the late 70s. It was a series. There were five books in total written about this particular family by this author. It was a big hit at the time. It also was made into a movie, and since then Lifetime has taken on V.C. Andrews' series of books and have turned them into limited series. So Flowers in the Attic was the main one. It was extremely shocking for the time. It touched on issues such as incest, and was a really shocking tale of betrayal and greed, um, family matters. It was just a really twisted tale, quite entertaining. And over the years, like I've reread the book several different times. I've watched the movies, not so great. But, I'm an eternal fan. So anytime anything has to do with Flowers in the Attic, especially if they're going to bring it to TV, I'm going to watch. So the reason I'm doing this review is because recently Lifetime has released a limited series called Flowers in the Attic. Flowers in the Attic, The Origin, and this is the story of the prequel to Flowers in the Attic. So there were five books. The first was Flowers in the Attic, Petals on the Wind, If There Be Thorns, and Seeds of Yesterday. And V.C. Andrews went back and wrote a prequel to this that tells the story of Olivia and Malcolm Foxworth and how all of this twisted stuff began. I love a prequel because for me, I'm always curious to know how these people, these characters, ended up the way they did. It's very easy to judge folks and have strong opinions about their behavior, and they should be judged, but it's also, for me, I've always been curious to know what happened to them that made them into the monster that they became. And Garden of Shadows, which is that prequel, does a really good job of laying out the groundwork for Olivia Foxworth, who is essentially the villain of Flowers in the Attic. So I wanted to do a review of this new limited series on Lifetime. It's being done in two parts. The first part aired last week. The next part airs this Saturday. And Lifetime has been doing these remakes for a little over a year now, maybe longer than that, of all of V.C. Andrews' series. So there's the Flowers in the Attic series. There's the Heaven series. There's Dawn, and then there's Ruby, and there's a bunch of other ones that were written later. That some were written by ghostwriters because V.C. Andrews did die, and somebody was writing under her name for years. And for people who read the books, you can kind of tell those that she wrote and those that she didn't write. The style was a little different. Anyway, so Lifetime has been creating all of these, and to me, they haven't really been well done. Um, you know, this one I think is probably one of the best ones. I mean, the first half so far, but the others really weren't great. But I watched them just because, I've read the books. I grew up reading the books, and so I'm curious to see how they were going to depict all of this. So I'm going to do a review of this part one, and then I'll come back and do a review of part two after it airs on Saturday. So let me just start with just a general summary of the book, of the actual book, Garden of Shadows. It's in the story. So we have Olivia Winfield, who is the story is set in the early 1900s, and she lives in Connecticut with her father. Her mother has passed away at this point. She comes from wealth, and she is considered a spinster. So back in those times, if you were not married by a certain age, if you had no prospects, you were considered a spinster. She was about 24 years old at the time, and she, no one was interested in her. She had kind of resigned to the fact that she wasn't going to find love. And the reason for that has to do primarily with her physical appearance. And that's one thing that I think they did not capture in the limited series. And I think it's really important because it kind of sets the tone for Olivia and why her esteem was low and why she might have made some of the decisions that she did. But I'm going to get to that a little bit later when I talk about the differences between the actual book and the series. in the limited series. So again, she feels like she's an ugly duckling. She's extremely tall. She has very broad shoulders, and she says she has like gray eyes and dull hair and sallow skin and all these other things. So she just doesn't feel like a beautiful woman. And at that time, a woman's looks really, her value is wrapped up in her looks. I mean, she's college educated. She's extremely intelligent. She's helping her father with the business. So she's a good businesswoman, but those are not the traits that were attractive at the time. So being those things as a woman really didn't add any value to you. If anything, it detracted from your value. But, she leaned into her strengths. Her father, possibly both her parents, knew that, she's not a typically pretty woman. And so perhaps that's why her parents encouraged her to go to school and encouraged her to read and to be aware of social events and to have her own voice, because they knew that she probably wasn't going to find a partner, or it would be harder for her to find a partner. So anyway, so she's growing up in Connecticut with her father, living a decent life, a lonely life, because, she obviously would like to be married and start a family, but it just doesn't seem like it's in the cards for her. Her father, who is a businessman, meets Malcolm Foxworth in his business dealings, and he brings him to the house to meet Olivia, hoping that there will be a match. Olivia is not optimistic about it because, her father has done this many times before. The men are not interested in her. Like, she says in the book that she often towers over them because she is 6 feet tall and she's not a traditional beauty. And so she's feeling like this is just an exercise of futility in even meeting Malcolm, but she goes along with it. They have the dinner. He comes to the house, they have dinner, and he starts to, show some interest in her, but primarily for her thoughts in her mind, and wants to know more about what kind of work it is that she does for her father. But although the kind of questions he's asking is, it's lending to somebody who's more interested in her business acumen than her as a person, but she is flattered because it's the first time somebody's showing that amount of interest. And he's extremely, extremely handsome. And that's one thing that's just a common thread throughout the Flowers in the Attic series. These are all extremely beautiful people. And that is, in many times, what the advantage that they have in life, because they are beautiful, but it's also their downfall, because there's a lot of vanity involved and things of that nature. But it's very important to note that we're talking about some extremely attractive people. This is how they're depicted in the books, and it's that the traditional, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall, athletic, thick, beautiful, golden hair, and like all those traditional characteristics and descriptors that they use to describe like a beautiful Anglo-Saxon person, in the United States. And so she's none of those things, and Malcolm is all of those things. He's taller than her, which is rare, and he's handsome, he's confident, he's rich, pretty much checking all the boxes. So Olivia is, in awe that this man would even ask her out to eat the next day, or to call upon her, as they called it back then, again, because that's just not been happening. And he is just like this, he's so handsome, he's all these things. So she's smitten by him, and the cynical part of her that believes it's never going to happen starts to dissipate, because it's looking like he's interested in her and he's courting her, and that this might be her happy ending after all. So he goes on to propose to her. She accepts, obviously. Her father is happy that, his daughter is like, going to be taken care of. I mean, not financially so much, but just that she finally has a husband and she can start beginning her life. They move, they meet in Connecticut. Foxworth Hall, where Malcolm and his family is from, is in Virginia. And shortly after they get married, he takes her back to Foxworth Hall, and he has a beautiful grand home that's been in the family for hundreds and hundreds of years, I'm imagining. And he tells her that he wants her to be the mistress of this home. And what we see is that he was never really courting her like in a heavy romantic way. I mean, he was showing her a lot of interest, and he did propose, but it becomes very evident quickly that he's not in this for love, and that he's not into her, and he asked her to marry him because he figuring it's time for him to have a wife, it's time for him to have children, and he wants somebody who is mature and responsible and can take over the responsibilities of managing the household because he believes he no longer has time for it. So she's being brought in not for love, but really just to kind of to fit a role, and it becomes evident to her, slowly but surely, that that's what this is. I mean, even from the time they get married, he says that he needs a quick wedding because he has to get back to Virginia for business. So, she doesn't even have an opportunity to plan a big wedding, which is most women's, especially at that time, most women's dreams to have this big elaborate wedding. She's robbed of that, but, she acquiesces because she's happy that, she's finally having her happy ending. Even on the way back to Virginia, she talks about a honeymoon and traveling, and he's like, we'll do that later. I have some business to tend to. So when they come back to the house, the way that, I think even the night that he brings her back to the house, she learns that night that they'll be sleeping in separate rooms, which wasn't uncommon at the time. But, you would think in the very beginning of a relationship, when two people are in love, or, there's some level of passion there, that you'd want to spend the night with your partner, have sex, all those things. And there's none of that. It's very much as if he hired her and brought her back to, where she would be working. She the first night he doesn't come to her, when she wakes up the next morning for breakfast, he's already gone for work. She has to communicate through the staff to find out where he is, what he likes to eat. And she just feels very much lost in this huge grand home, and he's just not making it a warm environment where what you would expect as a newlywed. And so slowly but surely she starts to see what this is. And then it starts to just move into a place of just, of cruelty, where he's not kind to her. He has a lot of issues and a lot of baggage that has to do with his mother. Apparently his mother abandoned him when he was 5 years old. So he's still dealing with that, and that's going to play itself out in a huge way in the book, and just kind of set the tone for the other four books, and all of the dysfunction and the tragedy that occurs. It kind of all stems back to Malcolm and this feeling of abandonment, and as a result, this fascination, this love-hate relationship that he has with his mother, who he only knew for a short period of time because she left when he was 5. So Olivia's story is sad. She just doesn't get, it's just not a relationship of love. They do go on to have 2 children. He is hell-bent on having a daughter for that same reason I mentioned, this fascination and this this fixation he has on his mother, and it's almost like as if he's trying to recreate her in his own way through a daughter. And so Olivia gives birth to 2 boys. He is extremely disappointed, especially in the second one, because he really thought the second one was going to be a boy. Then she learns she cannot have any more children, and he's really pissed because now he can't have the daughter he wanted. He largely ignores his children, his oldest son, and they just fear him. Every time he's around them, he's barking. He's not loving, he's not affectionate. Olivia's doing the best she can to try to insulate them from, his abnormal parenting style, if you want to call it that. She's learned at this point that this is a loveless relationship, and she's just kind of along for the ride, but she does try her best to love her sons and to protect them from Malcolm's wrath. I mean, the best case scenario, he ignores them. The worst case scenario, he's almost abusive. So, she has found that I guess her purpose in life at a certain point is just to make Foxworth Hall a home, and to protect her boys and to raise them well, because that's really all she has at this point, because she doesn't have a real true marriage. So then we get to a point where Malcolm's father, who his name is Garland Foxworth, he has been away all this time, traveling throughout Europe with his new bride. And we learn that he and Malcolm have this contentious relationship, or I should say Malcolm, or it's really on Malcolm's side, where he resents his father because he believes that his father's treatment of his mother is what made her leave when he was just a little boy. So he hates his father. He has pretty much taken over the business, and is, in a sense, wants to kind of push his father out because he rationalizes by saying his father makes poor decisions, and his mind isn't in the game, and he's a lovesick old man since he's married this woman, and blah blah blah. So Garland comes back home from traveling the world with his bride. Olivia is excited at first to learn this because, she's never met Garland. It's pretty lonely in the house, just the two of them, with the little boys and just the staff that works there. And she's thinking that Garland's wife will be, an age-appropriate woman. So somebody she can look up to, like a mother or a big sister, and just somebody else to have in the house. Come to find out that when Garland comes back, he is actually married to a young lady named Alicia, who was about 18 years old at the time. So this is definitely a May-December relationship. And not only is Alicia young enough to probably to be his daughter or possibly his granddaughter, but she is pregnant. So this is all a shocker for everybody. And so, Olivia is taken aback because, she's disappointed that the woman is not who she thought she was going to be. She is, the young woman is beautiful. And like I said in the beginning, Olivia has always struggled with insecurity about her looks. And so now you have a young woman in the house who is everything that you're not. And that is going to become a problem in a big way later. So there's that piece. Then Garland and Alicia are very much in love, and they're affectionate, and it just kind of shines a light on everything that she and Malcolm don't have. So that's another pill that she has to swallow. Even though Garland and Alicia are wonderful towards her and they treat her well, but she's, it's kind of hard to sit and watch something that you wish you had and you don't, and now you have to witness it day after day. And they're having a baby, and once the baby does come, it's a little boy named Christopher. And, Garland is a loving father to that little boy. And again, everything that Malcolm is not. So this is just a lot for Olivia to absorb day in and day out. And at the same time, Malcolm is in her ear, whereas he doesn't like his father. So he's constantly putting his father down. He's constantly putting down the relationship between Alicia and Garland. He is trying to, in a sense, set Olivia up against Alicia, reminding Olivia all the time that she's the mistress of this household, and Alicia is come second to her, and don't forget it. So it's almost like trying to create some contention between the two of them. I believe Malcolm is also concerned because now that his father has a son who is a baby, but he is now an heir to the Foxworth wealth, because he is Garland's son. So whereas Malcolm believed that, once his father passed away, this was all going to be his, now it's not quite going to be that, because he now has a brother. And then lastly, Malcolm is attracted to Alicia. Malcolm likes the ladies. That's something I failed to mention earlier. There are, and I'll talk about it a little bit when I talk about the wedding party, but Malcolm's most likely cheating. I mean, because he and Olivia have a loveless relationship. The only times they ever had sex was so he could conceive his children. So there was no affection there, and he's not going without it. So he's out here, fooling around with the local woman and, doing what he wants to do on the side. And now he has a beautiful woman in his house under his nose day in and day out. So there's that piece too. And that does not, Olivia is not ignorant to this fact. So there are so many different things at play once Garland and Alicia come back into the house. And it's at that time when things really begin to go left. So the huge event that sets off the tone for pretty much all of the books and all the dysfunction and everything horrible that's going to happen later is we find out that Malcolm has been coming on to Alicia. And this has been going on for a while. After she gave birth to Christopher, she snapped right back because she's a young girl. Her body was great. She is young and naive, as is to be expected for a woman that age. So You know, she probably wasn't aware of the signs of Malcolm maybe leering at her, looking at her too long, the things that he was saying. And she does come from a place of, or she did come from a place of seeing the best in people. So it's possible that she did not see the signs as soon as she should have seen the signs. And perhaps maybe should have gone to Olivia or gone to Garland earlier, but that's neither here nor there. So we learned that Malcolm has been coming on to her for a while, and at one point, it turns into a confrontation where he and Garland come to blows. Garland catches Malcolm coming on to his wife. They get into a fight. Obviously, Malcolm is a lot younger than him and in better health and condition, and Garland has a heart attack and he dies. So, you know, this is tragic for everybody. You know, everybody loved Garland. All the staff and everybody obviously loved him. Alicia is now a widow. There's this, you know, there's this veil of impropriety of how this all happened. You know, Olivia finds out about this kind of after the fact, and so she's kind of left to the versions of the story that everybody tells, even though she knows in her heart that her husband is an evil man and that, you know, Alicia is most likely telling the truth. But because of, like I said earlier, you know, she has all these unresolved feelings of, you know, of resentment and sadness and jealousy and all this stuff, you know, just kind of bundled together. And so it's in a sense easy to be mean to Alicia or to take it out on her because she can. And she definitely can't take it out on Malcolm. I mean, she's been under his thumb since they got married. And she is, you know, she's a victim of him just like everybody else is. And so, you know, she asserts her power in the way that she can. And it comes out against Alicia. So at the end of, and so I'm going to stop here. This is probably a little less than halfway through the book, but this is where the first part of the limited series stops. But once Olivia learns that this is what has happened, and she also learns that Alicia is now pregnant from Malcolm, and because of the timeline, they know that it's Malcolm's baby and it's not Garland's, and they're in a situation, okay, so what do we do? Now, you would think the easiest thing to do would be to just send her away with her and Christopher, her son, who was probably like, you know, two years old at this point, with money because, you know, Garland is gone. I'm sure he made provisions for his wife and definitely for his son to send her away with money and let her live her life out and just kind of try to forget all of this. However, that's not the decision that is made. Instead, the decision is to have to have Alicia go into hiding up in the attic, give birth to the little girl because they are just somehow convinced it's going to be a girl and Malcolm really, really wants a girl, and to now keep the child and Olivia to pretend as if it is hers. So Olivia will then, you know, pretend to be pregnant for months until, you know, the baby is delivered. And then after the baby comes, the child will now be Olivia and Malcolm's. And Malcolm will have the daughter he wanted. Olivia won't have the shame of a child out of wedlock. And Alicia will be sent off with Christopher with a bunch of money to go live her life. Now, you know, obviously we all see the problems with this and how wrong it is, but this is this decision that is made. And, you know, I think Alicia is backed into a corner. You know, now she probably doesn't realize that she has more agency than she does. But again, she's young, she's distraught, she's been through a lot. So she goes along with it. Malcolm will get his way, right? He will get the child who he believes will be a daughter. And Olivia, what does Olivia get out of this? Not much. But for her, in her head, she's resolved that this is her idea. It is her strategy. She's calling the shots, and it gives her control because up until this point, she's not had any control in this relationship. And like I said, while Olivia starts off as a decent person, all of these events turn her into somebody different. And she does some horrible things, and that it's this, you know, basically stealing this child from its mother, lying to the child about its origin, you know, locking the mother away from, like, there's just so many things here. Excuse me. that are wrong, but she rationalizes it that, you know, she is trying to clean up Malcolm's mess, and she's trying to give Alicia her freedom back. She's not going to be burdened now with two children by herself. So it's like she's rationalizing in her head that this is best for everybody, when it's not. But for her, it is control. So this is where I'm going to stop, because I'm going to review part two, and then part two is going to pick up from this point. But I wanted to talk a little bit in reviewing the differences between the book and the limited series, and the reason why I think these differences matter. I get it when they turn a book into a movie or to a show or whatever, that they obviously have to make changes. You know, you can't account for that much time in like, you know, these books are like 300 pages long. You can't obviously account for all of that in an hour or an hour and a half. But there are certain things that I think are important, because it sets the tone for the character development and for understanding these things. And so the first thing that stood out to me that was different was Olivia's height. When they're casting, I know that you can't always cast 100%. That's the problem. And just as an aside, this is the problem I had with the Lifetime series. Their casting was problematic for me. You know, for example, in the Heaven series, the actress that they cast to play Heaven is a redhead. And Heaven in the book, they call her the Dark Angel in part. Like, the second book is called Dark Angel, and they reference her dark hair color many, many times throughout the book. And it matters, and it's important. And if you read the books, you'll know why. So to just cast somebody with a whole different hair color, just as trivial as that may seem to some people, it's not trivial because of the amount of attention that went into the description of the character in the book and how many times it plays out, and just the importance of it. So when I see them not stay true to some of the aesthetics, it pulls me out, and it's hard for me to follow along, because I'm watching somebody who I'm like, this is not the character, you know, especially the V.C. Andrews did an excellent job, but she was very descriptive of her characters, and those features matter. And Olivia was one of those who she was very descriptive of. And the reason it matters is because part of Olivia's physical appearance is what made her so insecure, made her feel like she was going to die a spinster, made her feel like, you know, Malcolm was the ultimate prize because of what she had experienced up to this point. So to cast her, I just think it was important that if her being a 6-foot tall woman is a factor in her life, and it influences the way she moves through the world and the way people react to her and treat her, then it needs the character in the story needs to be a tall woman as well, because you need that piece of it for it to make sense. So in this, the casting, I think the actress Jemima Roper, I think her name is, I mean, she does an excellent job. But the fact that she was a short woman, it kind of turned me off a little bit, because I'm like, that's to me, that's not Olivia. Olivia's size, you know, her presence, her stature was all extremely important part of who she was. Like I said, they constantly referenced that she was 6 feet tall. So we see this woman who is short and petite. It just kind of doesn't fall in line. You know, she mentioned her gray eyes. She mentioned over and over again how, like, she saw her world in shades of gray. You know, like gray for you know, her eyes, and gray for the color of her skin, and all these other things. She mentions that several times. So I just also thought that was something that they could have incorporated into the character to make her this woman who, when you see her, you can see how she may feel unattractive, or she might feel how her looks have set the tone for how she interacts in this world and how people treat her. And I just think with the actress that they cast, you saw none of that. If I hadn't read the book, I wouldn't understand completely why the character felt like a spinster or felt hopeless about her prospects, because I didn't see anything about her that seemed really, you know, out of the ordinary. Olivia was out of the ordinary, and I don't feel like this actress really embodied that. So that was just number one that I thought was a difference between the book and the series, which I thought was where they missed the mark a little. The second thing in the book that stood out to me, the difference is Olivia's relationship with her father In the book, she seemed much more deferential to him and more in line with how women were with their parents at that time, that period of time, where your parents' word was gospel. You didn't talk back, you didn't resist, and the Olivia in the story was a little more outspoken, a little more assertive than the norm. And the reason that that stands out to me, and I'll give you an example. There's actually two examples where I think Malcolm asks her if he can call upon her, or asks her father for permission to call upon her. And she makes a point of saying, like, you need to talk to me if you want to ask me out, you have to ask me out. Almost like, don't worry about what he thinks. And again, when he proposed, and he said, may I ask your father for permission? She's like, it's my permission that you need in order to propose to me. So there were several instances where she made it clear that her father was like not the quote unquote boss of her. And the reason why that stands out is I think that the character in the series was much more assertive and had a way about her that I think would have been a little more combative with Malcolm, would have been a little more, would not have taken his crap as much as the Olivia in the book initially did. You know, eventually she found her voice, but I think in the book, her interaction with Malcolm was an extension of her interaction with her father. It's, you know, that same kind of relationship. You go from your father's house to your husband's house. In the series, she seemed a little more outspoken and progressive in her thought. Even in the series, when, you know, I think after Malcolm rapes her the first time, she packs all her stuff, and you could tell she's about to go back home because she's had enough of this, which makes sense. And it didn't work out because at the same time she learns that her father died in the series. But in the book, Olivia never made an attempt to leave, and never even seemed like she was going to make an attempt to leave. So I just think that there was a little bit of a difference in the temperament of the book, the character in the book, and the character in the series. Another big difference is that in the book, Olivia's father is a wealthy man. He also had made in his will, he made it clear that her money was to be her money alone after she inherited it, and Malcolm was to have nothing to do with it. He was very clear early on, maybe because he kind of saw who Malcolm was and realized that he wanted his daughter to have her own money. So she, after her father died in the book, she's a wealthy woman in her own right, which is important. And that kind of speaks to her choices and to her ability to what she can do with her life. In the limited series, she's about to leave Malcolm and go back home, and then she learns that her father died, and she also learns that they had lost all their money, that apparently her father was not this good businessman, and you know, they had nothing, so she had nowhere to go back to, which would explain why she stayed in Virginia, because she had nowhere else to go at this point. So those were two different distinctions between the book and the storyline, between the book and the plot in the series, which I think, I guess they made those decisions for, I guess, a creative reason. Maybe that made it so that Olivia couldn't leave, because maybe the viewers would be like, well, why wouldn't she just leave this man? But I think not only was it the money, but it's also in that time, women just did not get up and leave their husbands. It just wasn't a thing, and they did not have the rights that they have today. But yes, I just thought of note, it was just different how she related with her father in the book versus the series. The third thing that stood out to me was the wedding party. And this, I was disappointed that they left this out, because this kind of goes back to my first point about Olivia and her appearance and feeling unattractive and being viewed as unattractive. In the book, Malcolm hosts a wedding party, you know, to introduce Olivia to society, and to, you know, to announce their wedding. I guess it's kind of like their wedding reception or whatever. And Olivia takes pains to, you know, to dress the part. She wants to make a good impression. Clearly she's not a woman a socialite. She doesn't seem like she's into the latest fashions and all these things, but she does think about it, and she makes an effort to make herself pretty and to wear a dress that she believes is flattering to her because she wants to make a good impression. And once she enters the party, come to find out, all of the women there are dressed completely different. They're dressing in, like, I guess those, like, the 1920s outfits, those flapper outfits where women first started wearing dresses that were above their knees and the long pearls and all this other stuff. And so, that kind of gay 20s look that Olivia just wasn't familiar with, because, she lived a whole different life in Connecticut, and she felt out of place. Not only did she not dress the part, but she didn't look the part. And she didn't look the part because she was not a pretty woman. She was not the typical, woman who was into her looks and, wore the makeup and all of the jewels and the accessories and all the other stuff. She wasn't a girly girl. And as a result of that, not only that, and her demeanor and her height and her size, they treated her poorly. Throughout the night of the wedding party, she overheard people, talking bad about her, talking about the outfit she was wearing, commenting on how could Malcolm be with her, like, they're so mismatched. And, so she was insulted throughout the night, and her feelings were extremely hurt. She felt like she was treated like an outsider. Malcolm did very little to make her feel good. And that treatment that she received that night is important because I think it's where it sets the tone for her doubling down on not fitting in. It's one of those things where I will never be like these women. So what I'm going to do is be nothing like them. I'm going to be more intelligent. I'm going to be more informed. I'm going to read more. I'm going to have more opinions about important things. I will be nothing like these women at all because they will not embrace me. I don't fit in, so I won't try to fit in. And that right there also kind of lends to her life in Virginia, where she won't make friends and have, relationships with other women and fit into the social circles. And she will ostracize. She will be ostracized, and she will then ostracize herself, which lends to her being lonely, which lends to her being resentful, to being angry, to getting to the point where she would lock her stepmother-in-law in the attic because that's control. Right? Because she's such an unhappy person in all these other aspects of her life. So what does she do? They say hurt people, right? But that's important to Olivia's character. You kind of need to know the things that she's been through and how the lens she looks at all of this through that will make her this cold, angry, resentful woman that she turns into be. So I thought that they should have included that in the limited series. And again, if the character is not 6 feet tall, well, then they can't comment on that. That can't be a thing that everybody would remark on or be shocked by. Perhaps they could comment on the fact that she is, plain or, she's or unattractive or whatever. Like, I don't know, but I feel like they needed to pay attention to that because, again, like, that sets the tone for what we're going to see later. The fourth thing that stood out to me was Mrs. Steiner. So when she gets to Foxworth Hall in the limited series, all of the staff is outside waiting, and we see Mrs. Steiner, who is, I guess, pretty much runs the household. Like, she oversees all the other servants, and she's an older German woman, serious, and from the very beginning, she does not seem to like Olivia. I don't know if she views it as a competition. She was the head of the household up until this point, and now there's a woman here who's kind of, in a sense, taking over her role or whatever. But you see that there's, she gives Olivia a hard time to the point where she goes so far as she even holds Olivia's mail from her. So, and it's not clear why Mrs. Steiner is so mean to her. But in the book, there is a Mrs. Steiner, but then there's also another character called Mrs. Wilson, I believe, who is the cook. And what I think they might have done is created a composite character. They do this sometimes in books, like they'll have two different characters in a book, and when they turn it into a film, they'll take both of those characters and turn them into one, just to make it easier or cheaper or whatever. And Miss Wilson was strong, like a tall woman with stature, you know, similar to Olivia in a lot of ways. And I think there might have been some like respect there between the two of them because they both kind of maybe had similar experiences because the world probably viewed the both of them in the same way. Like, you're guys, like, you're not feminine woman, you're kind of like big and strong and those kind of things. And so there may have been some camaraderie between the two of them. But Mrs. Steiner in the book was always nice to her and also was, you know, what's the word? Not subservient, deferential to Olivia. You know, she did not battle her, she didn't challenge her, any of those things. So I don't know why they created this Mrs. Steiner where she and Olivia are button heads and they left out this other character. But I will mention that, and I'll talk about it in a second, that it's just an interesting twist that they're putting on Mrs. Steiner's character. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. The fourth thing that stood out to me that's the difference between the book and the series is Olivia and Alicia's relationship. In the book, like I said before, she liked Alicia because there was nothing not to like, but she was jealous of her. And Alicia represented everything she was not. So there was resentment and there was jealousy there, but it wasn't based on who Alicia was. That was all Olivia's stuff. But she was, from the very beginning, she had this tension with Alicia and she would make little snide remarks and she would do things like that, like just kind of poke the bear because she was jealous and she was hurt. And Alicia just took it in stride. You know, she felt sorry for Olivia in a lot of ways because she saw how Malcolm treated her and all these things. And she saw that, you know, Olivia was an unattractive woman who, you know, just wasn't happy. And so I think she gave her some grace because of that. And because of that, she kind of accepted some of the needling that Olivia did and just didn't take it to heart, you know. And then later it got really bad. But, you know, up until before Garland's death, you know, she just took it in stride. In the series, they seem to get along very well. And there seems to be none of that. And I'm sure it'll show up later in part 2 once, you know, Alicia goes to live in the attic and Olivia's resentment towards her is probably going to build. But there was none of that. I mean, and I think that that's important too because for the viewer, I want to know what changed that made it that you and her were cool to now you hate her and you're going to mistreat her. I think there should have been a slow burn. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of Olivia's jealousy or resentment or something playing itself out, you know, kind of under the surface while Garland was still alive. And then we get to this point where when she's all out mean to her, it makes sense. It just doesn't seem like it just comes out of thin air. So that was another thing that stood out to me. So the last two things I want to mention is the two other differences that I think these are things that weren't in a book that they are now introducing into the series. And I'm interested to see where this goes. The first thing is Mrs. Steiner. Like I said, she does have this, this detest towards Olivia on sight and it's not clear why. However, when Mrs. Steiner is giving her a tour of the house, she mentions that her mother used to work there and she grew up in that house pretty much with Garland. So we get the sense that she and Garland are a similar age. And when Garland comes home, her effect when she sees him is one of affection. Her eyes kind of brighten up. And it's not just I'm happy you're home. It seems like a romantic interest. There's something there. And I think that whatever that is, there's a story. And the story might be that either she and Garland had something going on when they were young because they grew up together or around the same time. You know, there's something going on and it's what's making her treat Olivia a certain way. And we just don't know what that is yet. So I think that's something that's going to play out. I was curious to see that. And the second thing is the new character, Nella. It's a black woman who is one of the maids. She and Olivia become friendly. She does not exist in the book. And I liked it though because I was glad to see somebody treating Olivia nice and Olivia have somebody like a friend or somebody that she can confide in and, you know, and consult. But, you know, she and Nella are good friends. Nella obviously knows a lot about the Foxworth you know, family, and she knows about the secrets, which I'm sure that's going to come up later. at one point Nella gets fired because Mrs. Steiner is jealous of their relationship, and Olivia goes to find her, goes to her house to bring her back because she does like her and she wants her to return to her employment at Foxworth Hall. Um, when Olivia goes to her house, after Nella says, okay, fine, I'll come back, we see a young woman in the background who is clearly mixed, and that woman is Nella's daughter. And she says, how come you didn't tell her who I am, or something to that effect. So there's a secret there. So I'm wondering, if I'm totally speculating here, is, did Nella have something with Malcolm? Is this his half daughter? Like, clearly the child is mixed. Clearly her father is a white man, and there's something that happened here. I mean, that kind of stuff happened a lot back in those days. But there's a story there, obviously, and I'm really curious to know what that is. Another thing of interest is that Nella has all these scars on her cheek, and there's a story there because, like, why would she have the scars unless there's a reason for it? So I'm curious to know what that's all about. So those are two new things that they're adding to the story, which I'm interested in. I'm curious. But for the most part, I have to say, I think they did a really good job of keeping the stories parallel. The casting for Olivia, I would like to have seen a little bit more of, her internal strife that, with regard to her looks and all that other stuff. And, it's moving a little fast. I think because there's so much story to unpack, they could have moved a little slower. Maybe they should have made it into 3 parts. Shit, 4 parts. I'd even go for that. But it is what it is. And I'm enjoying it. And I'm actually enjoying it more than I did The Flowers in the Attic and the other 3 of those, and definitely more than the other V.C. Andrews series that they've done. They put a little more time to it. There's some heavy hitter actors in here. I mean, we have, Kelsey Grammer, who plays Garland. We have, Harry Hamlin, who plays Olivia's father. And the woman who plays Mrs. Steiner, I can't remember her name. She's a great actress too. She's from Orange is the New Black. The man playing Malcolm, he's done a couple of movies in which you think he played Edward IV and some other characters. So I mean, there's some really good acting here. And, I think so far so good. But for my V.C. Andrews fans and those of us who kind of grew up reading these things over and over and over again, I'm really curious to know, what do you think about it? How do you think it's lining up to the book? If you have never read the books, what do you think about it so far? And, what do you think about part 2? And, what are they going to show? What do you think they should do? And what about these 2 new storylines with Mrs. Steiner and Nella? So that's pretty much it. I will be back next week to review part 2 and talk to you a little bit more about what that was all about, and maybe some more of the differences between the book and the series. So I will talk to you soon. Bye.